really involved in education. City school,
No, there's no phones in there either.
charter
That's not a
schools.
problem. I think I said it on Eric's desk when I was
The
looking
head
at the keys.
guy in the charter schools.
Put his money where his mouth is.
It's very interesting to say some of the statistics they came up with in that presentation. Rochester School Board, the highest paid school board in the country.
Yep.
Our student capital is the highest, 35,000 and change. Out of the top 200 large schools in the country, they place 200.
It's amazing how consistent they are at the university. In so many categories.
Question from the trade school board, wanting to know how they only spend $7,000 per student, but they hire.
Question of educational excellence, Detroit. When I worked at the county, our civil service we had responsibility only in the city school district. And they repeatedly acted like the law didn't apply to show eventually,
The more I think about that,
have Albany come in and say, no, this has to happen. After I think my third superintendent, I finally found somebody who was willing to say,
how the blocking was there
okay,
to support it.
we will obey the law, and over the course of time, we help them come into compliance with the law, which is, and my folks would get very upset and say, well, let's keep it in perspective. They can't even educate kids, so I can't be too surprised that they can't follow some sort of
They demoed it.
So,
Or is that?
I can see where we might fall.
Where's the vertical wall?
It's maddening, and if you ever walk down into any of the states, I think the current president is Saudi Arabia, and when she first got on the board, she was very much on outsider, and she didn't have any matches with all poor people. She would be swearing over meetings, she would be yelling at people in the audience, and it was like, okay, well, they've got one crazy lawyer. Well, she's president, and her behavior hasn't changed. The rest of the world has changed to where they think it's a virtue to be and she has no concern for accountability with the with any of the recommendations on this or changes that are. It's like every 3 years.
Great catch.
She says you got to do X, Y, and Z. She's like,
Because the more I thought about that, I'm like, okay, we don't have that final stamp drawn. But they wouldn't draw that, right? For no reason whatsoever, right? And that's why he said the drawing wrong, because
committee on open government is, they're literally asking for something.
all right. We should have copies of it, by the way, because you're not going to start a project of that magnitude without stamped, updated drawing, including any addendum, right?
I'll search our bank area first, and if not, I'll reach out to the developer.
Yeah.
Sharon, you with us now. And what do you think, Karen? It's 5:31. Okay, well, we will commence the March 24th, 2022 Webster Town Board Workshop. We have 3 agenda items tonight. We will start out. Our first agenda item is a presentation by Brayden Connor, our Director of Human Resources here, and the Aetna Medicare for Town Government Retirees. Hi, Brayden.
Hello. So thank you for having me. The specific item is the proposed intermunicipal cooperation agreement among and between 18 municipalities that form the Finger Lakes Health Insurance Municipal Trust. And by way of background, that is an organization that was formed somewhat over 10 years ago to bring bulk purchasing value to health insurance. And so instead of each municipality purchasing health insurance on the individual market, banded together and purchase it all as a group, and each organization is responsible for their own claims. But that has been incredibly successful over the past decade with a health insurance growth rate of the single digits. So that's well established, and the town has a long history in that program. So one of the things that that group talks about is, what else can we do? And so last spring, they, through their broker, put out an RFP with regard to Medicare plans. And so for our retirees, when they become 65 or otherwise Medicare eligible, they have to transition from their health insurance onto Medicare. And so the town has historically purchased off the group market from MVP, a Medicare plan. And so, that's what most towns do. They got bids back, and the bids demonstrated significant savings that was available. And so we've gone ahead and are going through the implementation process. Some of the key things about that RFP, though, is that the providers that were bidding to provide that service had to meet the existing plans. So sometimes in health insurance, the way that you have to save money is by shifting the cost between the employer and the employer, or between the patient and the doctor, right? The results of these plans are that the co-pays, the deductibles, the drug benefits are matched. So therefore, it allows each of these municipalities to make a change that has no negative effect on the retirees, but yet obtain savings for the town. So just in round figures, it will save at an annualized saving rate in 2022 of $218,000. That's a 56% rate reduction by group buying instead of buying on the individual market. So the power of competitive pricing in the marketplace has worked. In order to make this work, though, we have to enter into an intermunicipal cooperation agreement with all of the municipalities. And so that's the document that is in front of you. And essentially, intermunicipal agreements are authorized under section 119-0 of the General Municipal Law, and the procurement of health insurance by municipalities for employees and retirees is authorized under section 92A of the General Municipal Law. The transition is well underway. We have sent a notification letter from the town to all affected retirees, round numbers approximately 70. They have received a welcoming packet from Aetna, and by this point they should have their new enrollment cards, because the effective date of coverage is April 1st, and there's been 4 webinars. We avoided planning in-person events because at the time of the planning we were in the middle of Omicron, and so it was unknown as to whether that would be a good thing or not a good thing. So we went with virtual, and there's a dedicated call center so that people can get their individual questions answered for coverage. So I would, my request respectively of the board would be to authorize the supervisor to execute the intermunicipal cooperation agreement in advance of April 1.
A couple things on this, Braden, because obviously I've been involved with this, so it's funny because Councilman Dean, can we still call him Councilman?
Yes.
That's right, you're always a
Emeritus.
councilman, right? Emeritus, okay. He's in the crowd tonight, and you know, Barry, I've always said poker face, you kind of gave the same look I gave when I heard the savings and the percentage difference. And it's almost incredulous, like, that can't be, right? And it's funny because Paul Adams, our finance director, Brayton and myself attended, it was a couple months ago at the East Rochester Village Hall, whatever, Flimmick, how do you say that, Flimmick?
Yeah, Flimhead.
Flimhead meeting that was specifically about this bid from Aetna. And I think what pervaded at that meeting was you had 17 town supervisors, finance directors, HR directors, village mayors, all that all felt the same way, Mary, like, how can this be? And Aetna was there and gave a presentation, and, you know, Reader's Digest, you know, Braden and Paul, it is the power of the market, it's the power of their consortium at Aetna and whatever, and and like Braden said, there is no smoke and mirrors to this where there's, you know, reduced coverage for the retirees or anything like that. It's the same coverage, I'll say, Braden. I want to make sure I use the same.
In a majority of aspects, it's superior coverage, in fact. Most transactions have a lower copay, and traditionally there had been a geographic limitation that was basically New York State, not all of the state, but New York State. So if you were a retiree and you permanently relocated to someplace else, we had to come up with an alternative way to provide health insurance, and sometimes, well, certainly was administratively burdensome to the retiree, administratively burdensome to the town, and sometimes financially disadvantageous to the retiree. This is a nationwide network, so that problem will disappear for all future retirees.
Well,
all future
I think
Medicare.
everybody's heard of that. So that phonetically, Chad.
Okay, thanks.
So, I guess, and obviously, I guess the last thing I'd say is that one of the reasons I was incredulous at first is that, you know, you hear so many stories about, especially private industry, you know, retirees that went into retirement with the rules of engagement from their employer, their union, that was, hey, you don't worry, we got you on things like health insurance. And then because of economics and whatever, the rules of engagement are changed. And I always felt like that was a pretty crappy thing to do to somebody, and you can justify it all you want financially. It's just not a good thing to do to a human being. This is the antithesis of that. We are saving money for the town today, but certainly respecting our retirees, you know, of the town. Like you said, some parts it's superior coverage.
Well, I know that with the tax cap during the budget cycle, every type of expense has to be examined to see whether there's some efficiencies and such. And to me, one of the great things about this competitive bid process is that it makes this an affordable benefit for the town, which means that you know, we're achieving savings and we can concentrate on other areas for future savings that need to be.
So I want to open it, I mean, if there's any questions or comments from the board members. Ed?
My only comment in looking at this is, of course, whenever we hear that benefits are going to be changed and we're going with another carrier, everyone gets very nervous and is worried about, well, what are my co-pays going to be? What is my coverage going to be? I just went through this quickly, and 99% of them are better fewer copays, less dollar amounts of copays. The only one that's here is outpatient surgery where the copay is $10, as opposed to perhaps $0 on the other two. But the others are, for normal care, are just far superior, as you said. I wish I could sign up. It's a really great plan, and I think the fact that it is a portable plan, one that retirees can take with them, is just a huge benefit. I also know that this is the way healthcare is. This year it's Aetna, and when the other carriers see that they're losing an enormous amount of business, then they may be more competitive next year, but it's something that we certainly have to keep an eye on and continue to, as you said, be competitive.
Yeah, and even that one benefit, outpatient surgery, where it would appear that there's a $10 copay. A lot of times with outpatient processes, there's two charges. You know, there's a facility charge
Right.
and a doctor charge. In reality, I'm not even sure that it would be a negative.
Yes.
Now, I know that Attorney Genesi is going to be running late today, and he's doing so for a very good reason. He's doing something that's town-oriented, so he'll be in. But, you know, tonight's a workshop. It's the 24th. I know we have a special workshop next Thursday, the 31st, regarding Sandbar Park bids that will be coming in. And then our next regular board meeting is April 7th. As Brayton had said, his request at the end of his presentation is that the board authorizes the supervisor to sign this intermunicipal agreement with the other 17 or 18 towns here, because it's April 1st is the date. So, I mean, we can do that resolution tonight. Somebody else would have to make the motion, because I'm the supervisor. I shouldn't be making a motion to authorize me to sign the contract. We could wait till the 31st and augment the 31st agenda. If we wait until the 7th, as my friend Charlie Genesi says, I guess that would be non-pro-tunc, but I also don't want to squirrel this, for lack of a better term, breakable, so I'm reluctant to wait till the 7th. Knowing my Irish luck, all of a sudden some people will find out on April 2nd that their insurance isn't in place because the town board didn't authorize and sign. Is that cynical?
Is this something that you feel Attorney Genesi should look at for us?
No, I know he's, I mean,
Is he saying?
yeah, that's not the issue. It's just,
Well, I would suggest sooner than later.
I won't make the
Anything
motion.
with
I beg your
the disagree.
If we're all in agreement, I will make the motion to
Please
authorize
do.
these. Okay. I would make the motion that we authorize the supervisor to sign the intermunicipal agreement for Aetna Medicare for town government retirees.
Second.
Councilwoman Kelly.
Aye.
Councilman Abbott.
Aye.
Councilman Cahill.
Aye.
Councilwoman Wynn. Aye. Supervisor Flaherty.
aye. And Brayden, thank you.
Thank
And
you
one
very
last thing. When Patty said she wishes she could get this insurance, she can't get it because we will not allow her to retire. Just for the record.
Oh, and also board members don't get
Board members don't.
medical insurance.
Well, that's a technicality. I'm just saying, when you said, you know, it's a retiree thing and you're not retiring. So that's that. You know, Barry, you pulled that on us, but I'm not letting that bow down. Anyway,
Yes, and I already got my card in the mail.
look at you. Well, that's because you were in the highway department, not because you were a counselor.
Right.
Right? Braden, thanks. Fine job as usual. And we're right on time. Our second agenda item tonight is a presentation and discussion of future event traffic control options. It's going to be led by, I think, the Honorable Chief Dennis Kohlmeyer. And for people in attendance or watching at home, you may recall back, I think it was January 13th, at that board meeting or workshop, we said that we would come back by March 24th with what options have been researched on this. And Hello, Chief.
Hello.
You're a man of your word.
Try to be.
So I'll hand the baton to you.
First of all, when we had that initial discussion in January, we identified that there's three general categories that we're going to try to research in. Those categories were the paid peace officer, paid non-peace officer, and volunteer non-peace officer. Before we tried to find the right solution, we wanted to clearly identify what we were actually trying to accomplish. So one of the first steps we took was to go through the activity of the special police and look at what a calendar year would look like from an events perspective to see what type of services we were providing. So as you see on the screen here in the handouts, this is a list of the annual details that the special police conducted. We tried to identify the length of the detail, the frequency, and number of days to give us a total hours per event. We then categorized, with the help of the committee from the former special police, to identify what resources they would assign to these details and then come up with projected hours. So really what that did for us is it gave us a good idea of what services we were trying to maintain moving forward with whatever solution we ended up identifying. The only kind of caveat is down at the bottom. There's three categories for emergency call-ins. Those are annual details. Those are very situational. So there's some years where those numbers would probably be hit, and there's other years where they may not, or there may be years that they're exceeded. So that's kind of a ballpark based on experience over the last 20 years or so of what a typical year might entail. So we ended up with a total hour commitment from the special police to be just under 1,300 hours, 1,293. So that gave us an idea of what we were looking to accomplish. So like I said, we looked at peace officers that are paid, paid employees that are non-peace officers, and volunteer peace officers. And we went through an option analysis to try to identify what requirements would come with each option and what were the pros and cons of those options. So starting at the top with the paid peace officer, as we know from our previous discussion, New York State doesn't allow volunteer peace officers, so that is the only option for the peace officer category. With that comes the powers of arrest, use of force, non-lethal weapons, all of the power and authority that comes with the peace officer's position. One of the discussion points with that level of authority is whether that is what the board desires in the unit that gets created, whether they are looking to have a supplemental body of employees that have the power of arrest outside of the police department, or under the police department outside of the police officers. Because of the duties and responsibilities that come with that position, we felt it would be appropriate to have a full law enforcement uniform. Some of the pros of having that level of position is that compared to our previous discussion, they are covered by workman's comp because they're employees. It might aid in recruitment and retention because of the interest in that type of position. It would allow the town to have a broad scope of services and training is highlighted on both pros and cons because with additional power and responsibility comes an increased level of training. So that amount of training that the special police go through is a benefit. Some of the negatives that come with that option are the cost. As we saw historically, the special police attend an academy. We talked about the academy hours now being elevated to 190 hours for the onboarding. So that's not annual, that's to obtain the peace officer certification. With that comes the cost of paying them to attend the training. So previously they were attending as volunteers to get their certification and get paid for that. We'll get to a cost analysis in a couple minutes. So that cost would cover the personnel, the training, and equipment associated with that option. One of the other cons is risk. So with powers of arrest and having the ability to use force that obviously elevates the risk and potential activities that the paid peace officers would be involved in. One of the cons is civil service limitations. There's only 2 active civil service titles that allow for paid peace officers. One of them is a part-time police officer, and the other one is a special patrol officer. The special patrol officer is limited to people who are retired peace or police officers appointed from a competitive civil service list. So that would not include any of our former special police officers. So the civil service limitations there, even if we went with the paid peace officer options, basically limits you to retired police officers moving forward. There's a potential for grievances, not having negotiated yet with the union on the impact of having other paid law enforcement entities in the town. And again, the training commitment is 190 hours. For the paid non-peace officers, the level of authority is really to be determined. The initial discussion was about the power and authority of a flag person, similar to other traffic control devices. Since our last meeting, we'll do some research that doesn't appear to be so much of a feasible option. The vehicle traffic law pretty specifically defines what a flag person is, and it limits that to construction sites, railroad crossings, and escort vehicles. So really the authority to achieve the services we're looking for is something that has to continue to be investigated to try to identify. For uniform, we felt they wouldn't need a full law enforcement uniform. Having something with high visibility and at least enough to convey the minimum level of authority that they're being given by the town would also allow them to be covered by workman's comp, and it has a reduced training commitment from the peace officer position. Some of the cons are, again, civil service limitations. The civil service limitations aren't only entitled, there is no current title that would fit this appropriate level of authority the town wants to convey, so there has to be something that's created. And in addition to that, when it comes to hiring and terminating services, you end up with the protections of civil service for the employees, so it becomes a contested competitive position that you have to go through that entire process. For the volunteer non-peace officer, again, it has the same question on authority. It's pretty similar to the paid non-peace officer position because there would be no expectation of powers of arrest or anything to do with interaction with traffic control. So a visible clothing to provide safety and minimal authority to convey their position in the town. Again, reduced training, and another benefit potentially would be lower barrier to entry. By being able to appoint people and have people transition a little bit quicker, it potentially allow more people to participate in this public events unit. Some of the cons, it has the same concern we had with the former special police, that because they're volunteers, there is no loss of wage protection. So any injury they sustain on their duty for or services for the town would be covered for the medical treatment, but it wouldn't allow for the loss of wage compensation, similar to the discussion we had in January. And then recruitment and retention, it may be difficult to attract people and retain them in a position where they may not feel they have the status or authority that comes with what we previously had. And part of the discussion we had is if you look to the right, each one of those arrows that goes up kind of increases as you go from option 3 to option 1. And there's different levels to each option. And really, the thought process here is that as we increase up with power and authority, you potentially have the ability to deliver more services. The training requirements increase. The cost increases in order to provide those services. And the risk increases based on the duties they may be performing. And ultimately what we want to do is be able to push all of those to an appropriate level that allows us to provide the value that we had or increase the value that we were previously providing. And really, in my opinion, it's up to the board to decide what level of services based on the amount of training, based on the cost analysis, and the level of risk adversity that the board has based on the services that we provide. So I guess the intent there of that graphic is to allow you to picture that as you select up the options, each one of those is probably going to increase to the final level you're comfortable with. So our next step was try to identify what the cost of those options would be. So we went through an exercise where we talked through as a group using Director Connor to help with the human resources aspect, and the group as a whole to come up with what would the appropriate categories would be here in dollar amounts. So if you start with the upper left, you have the titles that we talked about, and we put what we would expect to be the compensation, an hourly rate for those services. And the members box was a projected 15 member organization based on the current staffing of the former special police, what that amount was. And as you look at it, the colors associated with the titles, so the top one is the paid peace officer, the initial training, and so we try to break it out based on initial training and annual recurring costs. So for the initial, you have 190 hours at the $25 an hour to give you a subtotal of the $47.50. We anticipate about 16 hours of annual training in order to keep them current with the responsibilities and meeting expectations that would be of the organization to make sure we're training our people appropriately, for an annual cost of about $400 per person. So the costs are not necessarily a subtotal or a total at the end. We have to kind of talk about it as a per person and a fixed amount, which is more variable. So the hours of activity pay, based on the activity chart, we counted that the special police provided 1,293 hours at $25 an hour, gives you a subtotal of $32,325. We looked at uniform and equipment, where we believe it would cost about $2,000 to outfit somebody with that level of authority and title. And then annually, we figure it's about $400 with equipment and uniforms over a 5-year cycle to keep them current and replace them. We anticipated some of the back-end costs that come with the human resources and administrative costs of those positions. Because again, once they're paid employees, there's a lot of other costs associated with them other than hourly rate. So we ended up with the initial back-end cost from their onboarding and training, and then the annual back-end cost based on the training and activity pay. So for the paid peace officer position, we end up with projected annual cost of $51,721 for training and activity. That doesn't account for any onboarding. Anybody that we onboard would be a per person rate of about $7,800. So that would be projected depending on what the turnover rate is and what the staffing level that's set by the board. And the bottom two options are the same concept, just broken out based on the lower dollar amount and reduced training requirement. You'll notice the annual hours is a little bit less. It's $100 less. What we looked at is one of the duties and activities that the special police had was the foot patrol at the carnival, where our focus going forward would be more traffic oriented and not associated with foot patrol. So we limited we eliminated that from the calculation to basically put it at 100 hours less annually. So we end up with respectively the $31,843 as an annual projected cost for the same services we provided previously, and initial onboarding cost of $874 per person, depending on turnover and retention rates. And then obviously for a volunteer option, it's essentially the uniforms and equipment, both initially and then prorated over like a 5-year cycle at $100 per person. So I know I'm talking fast, open to questions, just have the summary slides to talk about. Really what it comes down to is there's more challenges than solutions by the time we got to this point in our discussion. For the paid peace officer, there's civil service barriers that basically are identified by the fact that the only current civil service title that's appropriate would be retired peace or police officer. The cost is significant to have a paid peace officer. And then the risk first need conversation of does the board feel the requirement of having those level of services or authority with this position going forward. And then for the paid non-peace officers, there is no appropriate civil service title. And we have a question of authority that we have to resolve to identify whether we can put people out there directing traffic and make sure that we're giving them the appropriate authority and training to do so. And then the same thing applies to volunteer peace officers, or volunteer non-peace officers. So, I know there's a lot of information real quick. I was trying to meet my timeline here for the workshop, but anything you'd like to discuss or questions I can answer, please feel free.
Well, we're not going to short time on this just because we have 15 minutes. And I'm sure that since Councilman Cahill's leading the third agenda item tonight, he can probably truncate that down, right? No?
Take as long as you need.
Okay, yes, we're not going to. Chief, thank you. Great presentation, good slides. They're there for posterity. I'm sure they'll make their way to being posted so people can see them and absorb them a little bit more. Two things that I'd like to comment on or question, whatever, to start the Q&A or whatever is it. One, I think it was Tuesday we had our last meeting with the full group. Patty's been involved in this, like we said, back on March 13th. Chief, myself, Brayden Connor is our Director of Human Resources. And then the leadership of the past Special Police unit has been involved. Specifically, Mike Charlin, Joe Monachino, and Gene Coleman. And one of the things 2 days ago that we summed up was just the timeline since January 13th. And one thing I felt pretty good about was that there was a good amount of meetings and a good amount of hours spent on this, both as a group of 7 of us. A lot of those discussions and meetings kind of led to these summaries. So I feel pretty good about the last 2 months as far as the effort put in to vet this. The second thing is, what Chief has shown here is the 3 options that we always were researching throughout this process. At the meeting 2 days ago, we talked about the 4th option. And the 4th option is somewhat shown in the first slide, is that, and I think you have in the columns, that the Webster Police Department could backfill these events with traffic control that are the annual events. And there's a cost associated with that and whatever. But we said that within that option, is that does there exist, because through the conversation, your dad's not here tonight, is he?
No.
Okay. But I know that Joe and Mike know this, is that is there an appetite to approach the state legislator government about, I'll call it changing the law that has basically led to this, Brayden, how would you describe it, Chief? They're oxymoronic, or there's just it's not structured where it makes any sense. They didn't have the foresight back when they, how would you describe it? Put you on the spot.
There's statutory conflicts that prevent the continuation of the prior service. And so that's led to the town board being in a situation that is untenable, and for the folks looking for a solution to having to choose from suboptimal choices. Every choice is suboptimal. And so, an arguably better solution would be to have the state legislature resolve the statutory conflicts that they've created over time.
And that's an easy process, right, Rick?
They can do that if they want.
Yeah, there's, I'm just a bill.
Yeah, I remember that for, yeah. Loves rock. Loved it.
Yes.
And the thing is, I think that throughout this process, the 7 of us, the leadership of the past special police, we all agreed that, I think we were all unified in our belief that this is because there is that statutory conflict. So that is an option. All three of these things we can just, forget about. And for the time being, have the police department, and Dennis, you've shown how you can do that, backfill that service and what the cost is. But I don't really, right now, on March 24th, we haven't done enough vetting to understand really how to approach the state government with this. And really, I'll use the term, is it an effort that is tantamount to swinging at windmills, that it'll never get through, because we just don't know how many of the other 920 towns and however many villages and whatever are really, like, this is a hot topic for them, that they really want to get this statutory conflict resolved, so we all live happily ever after with essentially the structure of the past special police, where it's peace officers and they're volunteer and they, and is that a good way to describe it? And I'm still somewhat of a rookie to this government thing, but I'm starting to figure it out a little bit that, as we would approach our state assembly person and our state senator to try to get some momentum on this, we would have to do some research to see, does this have a shot to get to first base, where there could be momentum built through the state assembly, through the state senate, where there would be an appetite for it at that level. We just haven't done that research yet. We made it to March 24th and we did what we said, but that kind of has come up in the last conversations, that, that is option 4. We just don't know. I couldn't even fathom who is the one that takes that baton and runs with it as the project leader, who goes and does the research and all that to find out if it's a worthwhile effort. I don't know. And
I think you reasonably project, you're talking years like that.
I'm not even talking the time frame of, as you know, that this is a bill, not just a bill, whatever. The reality is, and I'm trying to think how to say this, that this is policing. This is law enforcement. I'm an idealist. I'd like to think that, that maybe the events of the last couple of years has opened the eyes to our government, our state government, to say, we need to start putting a little bit more respect and emphasis on law enforcement, law and order. I hope that happens. But I'm just saying the truth here, and people can agree to disagree with me. That is not what the state government has done the last couple of years. And so that's why I say, forget the time frame. Is there an appetite for the current legislator and how they're constructed, and the current Senate and how they're constructed, and the governor, how it's constructed, where they would say, this is something we really want to get behind? I don't know. So, that's the start of the Q&A, and really, Chief, there was no Q in there, was there? I'm done. I'll hand the time to the other board members.
I'd like to hear from you gentlemen what their position and your members' positions are with respect to these 3 options.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to do that, now we don't have the podium set up, so where do we
I go there.
Can you come over here, because I think camera-wise and all that, nicely played, Jen. But let's make sure that Joe can be seen at home live,
And I get to sit down?
but also for posterity when people go back and look at the tape later.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, I think my name is Joe Monachino. I've been with the former Special Police Unit for over 30 years. I was chief for over 10 years of that. I am currently a certified instructor, and I help assist in training of other special police departments in the county. But I just have some comments. First of all, I want to thank the chief and the board and the supervisor for allowing the committee and myself, Mike and Chief Holmeyer, to be part of this, to come up with solutions. I really appreciate that, and we thank you for that. Well, one couple comments is, we think about the future, right? The future is very important, and I feel there's an opportunity here to make perhaps whatever this new unit will be or not be bigger, better, and stronger than it was before. Obviously, there's tremendous amount of savings by going to peace officer paid, right, compared to what it would cost an hourly wage to pay a police officer. We're not going to replace them. That's not the intention. Never was the intention. But in the day and age that we live now, with the emergencies and the threat of war, the Canadian nuclear power plant, all that, we need to build this unit, right, for the future of our town. And I think, depending on what options we go here, but a paid peace officer being one of them, that would help build that for the future at a reasonable cost, even by paying a peace officer. We continue to keep expenses down for public safety, and perhaps we can maybe in the future expand those services even more. And I'll give you an example. We're probably going back 5 or 6 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. We were asked to help with code enforcement. And we went out and we really checked every house and business in the town of Webster within, I think it was a week period. And we came back with almost a football field full of unregistered vehicles and people that had in their possession junk, so to speak, right? So we were able to do that, with no cost. But even if there is a paid component to it, it's a very reasonable. I think it's important to also remember if we can retain our current roster, right? We can maximize expertise and the training that they have, right? So I know we talked about 190 hours and the cost incurred for that. We have 15 members that have already gone through the majority of that training. So the initial startup cost would be zero for that. We're still considered certified peace officers, as the state sees us, and I think that's up to a period of 2 years. And one thing that I wanted is actually the last thing is that possible transfer to the Webster Police Department is a great advancement resource, right? So we have people that want to get into law enforcement. We're paying them to run the best behavior. What a great opportunity to get the best, the cream of the crop, and go into full-time law enforcement position. For recruitment purposes and in the future, I think that is an incredible advancement resource. That's all I really have. I know that if you look at the financials, and I know we're going to look at all the different options in the board will, but I encourage you to look at those points that I mentioned. Still, even with a paid peace officer and the risks and all that stuff associated with it, the value is there. We had the risk before. There's always going to be risk. Now, as the new unit hopefully comes together, we'll still have those same risks, but a cost is still a lot lower cost than to employ the police department and pay them the overtime over the wage. So that's all I have. I want to continue to keep Webster life is worth living. Any questions?
Any questions for Joe? Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question for the chief, and this question was spawned by my driving by an intersection where there was a fire at the house, and there were volunteer firemen directing traffic, and they do that on a pretty regular basis, right? How does that compare to volunteer non-peace officer, or is it not analogous whatsoever?
They actually don't relate. In theory, they do. I mean, it's the same concept, directing traffic, but the power that they use to do that drives from a different place.
Okay.
So essentially, there's two components for firemen. I was actually just reading this today. There's two components for fire agencies to direct traffic. One is a authorized fire police squad that is established. Pardon me. And they are actually listed in the CPL as when they are active at a fire scene. It's very specific authority during the time of the actual event. They're allowed to control traffic and direct traffic. The other one is that ultimately that responsibility falls to the fire chief, and the fire chief can delegate it to firefighters that aren't part of the special police squad in order to divert traffic at a fire scene. So it's very specific to fire scenes, and it's derived under the authority of the fire chief, essentially.
If it pleases you, I have one other element that goes along with that. And it goes to this issue of statutory conflict. Firefighters and fire police are covered by workers' comp law. There's specifically, even when they're volunteers, there's specific statute to cover them.
Okay.
And so the state legislature recognized that as a problem at some point and did something about it. And there's no analogous coverage for voluntary special police, which is one of the risk factors that had been previously identified.
Jenny?
Thanks.
Bill?
A lot to digest and review. I mean, we just did this today, so it's a lot to look at. And I'm not seeing an outlet for our special police department.
A lot to digest and review. Well, I think that concludes that item tonight, but I also, I want to be cognizant and sensitive to the fact that I don't want to just leave it hanging in the air and say, well, we said we'd come back on the 24th, check the box, we came back on the 24th. That doesn't feel good because there's, as Councilman Adams said, there's a lot to digest and review. So I'm not going to put out a date to come back to this, but I'm going to take your words, Bill, and say, let's digest, let's review, and figure out soon coming back and maybe looking at this again. And I can't stress this enough, and I'll talk to Brayden and the crew about it, because it really just came to focus 2 days ago about what would it take to go to the state. And as you said, Jen, you can only assume how long that process would be. But like I said, I'm an idealist. You got an election coming up in November 22. The configuration of the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor could be very different.
Yes.
And from that standpoint, timing is everything. That could be a low-hanging fruit item for them, for a new configuration. I'm going to be very careful with my words, I guess. So, we'll be back. I just don't know when. I don't want to make any. It was easy to make the promise that in 60 days we should be able to put in some work, and we did. I feel good about that. I don't know what date to say we'll be back to after we absorb and all that, though.
I do have one more question, and let me just say that, I really appreciate all the hours that these gentlemen have put into this, and Patty also. My question is, under volunteer non-peace officer, questions of authority, how do we get some type of answer to that question, which is a very reasonable question? Or is it something that the town could establish through a local law? I'm asking the questions out of ignorance.
I would be answering out of ignorance. I don't know. I'd have to do some more research on that.
All right. Well, I'd be interested in, hearing. And again, thank you for all.
And John, interesting enough, I have a meeting next week with Around the Town Supervisor Rory Fitzpatrick, and I think, Chief, they had a contingent or that is essentially our third there, volunteer non-peace officer. Is that correct?
Yeah, essentially. So I think there's some limitations on what they're allowed to do, because I think the ultimate conflict comes down to the ability to block traffic and redirect traffic is specifically listed as either a flag person or a police officer in the vehicle traffic law. And then the flag person is very specifically defined to construction, railroad, or escort vehicles. So, and that's where I don't know if the local law allows for exercising authority of the state vehicle traffic law. So that's part of the research that needs to be done, and I don't think Ironic quite crossed that bridge either. I believe that their police officers are the ones closing the road, and then they're staffing it or supplementing that with the volunteer activities. And again, it's a question of trying to get some position that has the authority to meet the needs that we're trying, which is traffic control, but also navigating some of the challenges that the only apparent authority currently right now doesn't fit what we're looking for, and that's the big difference.
Thanks. Okay. Well, that concludes that part of tonight's workshop. And the third item tonight, before I hand the baton to Councilman Cahill, I was so happy when I pulled up tonight that it's a 58-degree night.
Yes.
And it's dry.
You're gonna start on the back,
I
right?
knew that
Is
there
that where
was
we're going?
no ice standing and that it was going to cave in on me tonight, right? Is that true, John?
You did see the rest of the week, the temperatures going down.
Yes.
So,
You're a negative guy.
I'm still holding on to winning this battle.
So with that in mind, when I handed the time to John Cahill, and I think this is the first time we've done this, at least since I've been a supervisor, that the presentation is kind of being led, for lack of better terms, by one of the board members. And the reason why is that, we have a board that has varying professional expertise. Bill, there might come a day on an engineering thing where we have you lead. It just so happens that Councilman Cahill, your experience is, this is your bailiwick. This is kind of right up your alley.
I appreciate it. And this discussion stemmed out of the discussion that you and I had out in the parking lot with respect to my strong belief that based upon the water infiltration due to ice damming on February 1st, where there was a significant amount of water that came into the building, and you can see the visual damage. So we knew at that point we were going to have to do something, right? So temporary measures were taken by Mary and Josh worked together. That's why I brought them in there to be part of the discussion. But my advice was that let's have an asbestos survey done, a mold survey, and a lead survey, which is pretty standard practice in the restoration business, which is we'll be doing some demolition, we'll be doing some restoration here. Do we know the scope? No, we don't know. All right, but these surveys, when they're done, will be presented to the insurance company. Okay, so we will know better what the entire scope will be. So the asbestos surveys are required by law. I thought it was only for certain years back, but I spoke with Mary at Paradigm, and she sent me over a very comprehensive list that identifies New York State laws and the health laws and OSHA, that it's mandatory that you have this done. We know that water came into the building, we know that it went on the outside, we know that it came on the inside between the two walls. Whereas you may not see water damage on the outside, but mold could be present on the inside. So that's the reason you want to have the mold surveys done. You want to know that if there's what the level of mold is in there, because different people mold can impact them differently. And I know that we had people handing out test kits, and our own employees, by the end of that day, were having sore throats. Do I attribute that to mold? Absolutely not, I can't. But this mold survey will tell us that. And the lead surveys are required for any building. I think it was in 1978, Josh? If your building was built prior to 1978, Nick, is that correct? A mold survey is required. I realize that we just had renovations done down here in 2017, right? So we can't find any surveys that were done back then.
For lead.
I'm sure, for lead, asbestos, or mold. So it's always good to complete your due diligence for any loss. And that's standard across the industry. So some of the Josh, you want to briefly explain what the temporary measures were?
Sure. We called the contractor that did the original work back in 2017 to come and kind of evaluate potential causes. And they proposed to do a temporary measure, which they completed, which was basically caulking all along a seam at the edge of the metal roof. They did indicate that that should get us through this current winter season, but it's obviously not a long-term fix.
Right.
So we're looking at other options to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again.
Right. So we brought up 2 different companies in to assess the situation, and one company assessed it. They essentially are both feel that it's heat loss that's causing the problem. Right? I have my opinion on it. I agree with that, but I think there's other measures that we can be taking to, prevent this from happening in the future. And we'll talk more about that later, but Josh and I had a good look at the drawings, and Mary and Josh. So we do have currently 2 estimates from 2 different companies. But again, it's very important to have these surveys done. We have 3 companies that have submitted bids for the surveys. I read them briefly this evening. I think that the 2 companies that we used to use regularly, one is more comprehensive with respect to their survey, but I want to do a deep dive into it so we make sure we're comparing apples to apples.
And John, just because the 3 bids, Paul's here, our finance director, the asbestos, mold, and lead paint, professional service, procurement policy, best practices, go out and get 3 companies, and that's what we did.
Right.
And which nicely done. That's different from when we try to get the final remedy thing, because
That's a whole different.
it'll be more money than the surveys.
Yes, it could be significant. It's going to be significantly more money, regardless. But the surveys, we did talk to Josh and I walked the entire building with the insurance adjuster and identify the areas where the water did come through. Okay, and there's a significant amount of square footage that were impacted by that water. So there's a pretty good potential between those walls. There could be more. But when these surveys are done, all right, they will be forwarded to the insurance adjuster. He's waiting for those surveys. He needs the surveys to do a complete adjustment with respect to the loss itself. So we won't know the scope, and he won't know the scope until he sees the surveys. So I'd like to get 3 of us together, decide which direction we want to go, put that before the board, pass a resolution if required, and then get the company in here that's chosen to get these surveys done as soon as possible, so we can continue down the road of a permanent fix to this.
And to tell you, I don't even know if the resolution has to be done, because the bids, the range is, for the professional service was around, how much?
No, I'm not talking about the survey bids. I'm talking about the restoration, the demolition
yes,
restoration.
we'll have to do a restoration.
Okay?
Yeah.
The insurance company needs these bids so they can formulate what their
I
adjustments
got
should be.
Okay.
So that's where we are. Thank you, Josh and Mary and Nick. Appreciate you coming in. Paul, it's been a lot of help with the insurance company. I did leave a message with Joe Parisi also with respect to prevailing wage. And he emailed me like 5 minutes later.
And he's the town insurance.
Yes, he's our insurance representative. Very, very quick to get that. So
He's good at that. John, is there any connection between the surveyors and the repair contractors?
no.
So they're basically 2 separate specialties?
Yes. Yeah. There are specialty companies out there that deal with water losses. We'll wait and see what happens. Okay. You don't necessarily need a restoration company to come in and do what needs to be done, but it's something to take a look at, because if there is mold, and we need to have that demo, there's specific areas that we need to be set up, and it's going to be pretty difficult to plan, given that this is the court building. It will be very, very disruptive. So it may be something that may have to happen in stages, but that's, until we get the scope, we really don't know, right?
Well, I will tell you this, and I'll hand it off to the rest of the board, but for anybody that doesn't know, I've always said that Councilman Cahill has missed his calling because he is like an investigative reporter that goes down every path to get information. It's really, I gotta tell you, it's impressive. So thanks, John.
I'm just glad to help.
Taking the ball and running
You
with
got a
it.
great team to assist too, and I'll have some further information when Josh and I and Mary can get to the bottom of those drawings. We found some very interesting information.
Well, I know you said that when you looked at the original blueprints of how the
Overhang.
they wouldn't have built that today like that.
The existing?
Yeah,
No.
right.
And
But
I
that was,
wanna-
what was that, 1970 or?
Right.
I don't know, do you know what it was?
They probably wouldn't build my house in the 1890s when it
Right.
was built today,
So-
so things change,
Things changed.
standards change.
Well, I think we'll have some enlightening information in the next few days, probably a week, but we need confirmation on some drawings.
Jenny?
Thank you for your time, and thank everyone, I'm just looking forward to further resolution.
Yeah. Bill? Engineer Bill?
He's doing a good job, keep at it.
Well, that is the ultimate compliment
Bill.
there, Mr. Cahill. Okay.
No, I will see what we hope to uncover.
How about you?
No.
Good, no good? And, geez, I hope Nick and Mary, you don't feel like you got shorted tonight.
Do you have anything to add?
I think I'm going to be buying somebody lunch next week, 3 p.m.
Just do,
I appreciate you guys coming in.
Nick, Mary, anything to add to this?
I guess I'll add that it's not just an ice damming issue that we're experiencing. We're also having interior condensation throughout the year. No? You're shaking your head?
You're right.
What?
But
So there's moisture, not just from the outside coming in, but that's developing from the inside. So the damage could be further spread out in the building than just what was shown with the ice damming issue back in February. So you can see light fixtures in some other areas of the building that have rust spots, and they're not underneath the high roof necessarily, but they're flanking it, so there's additional damage that we might have to
So
deal
you
with.
think this started long before the damming problem, but
Right, that's not the only reason why there's
More
damage to
potential.
the building, yeah. And you know, there's metal conduits up in the ceiling and pathways and stuff like that that could be, you know, their lifespan shortened because of this, so it's an overall poor design that we're trying to remedy.
Okay. Well, hey, Nick?
I'll just add that I know that the ice damming is probably that's really what's shown. It's a major thing from that thaw that we had and all the ice that was up there. Water can get in anywhere that it tries to. So I would say that it definitely, a lot of the damage was from, that ice damming over this area. That's visible at least.
it doesn't help that there's no overhang there either.
Yeah.
That-
And overhang there.
The snow comes down and it goes right down the vertical wall and just builds itself up.
There's reasons why houses and structures have soffits and overhangs.
Exactly.
To prevent stuff like that.
Right.
Well, hey, thank you, gang. Okay, that concludes tonight's meeting, unless anybody has any other things to bring up. So, Fox College basketball tonight, gang. thank you, everybody.
Have a good night. You too.
Thank you.